scientism, and its way of mechanizing life and society and turning humans and the individual into units of measurement, right? We become statistics. We become very sterile, standardized, lifeless statistics that are used to create categories, and we're kind of played almost as if we were games, right? Gamification. Why is gamification becoming so popular now? Because we are perceived as if we are bits, right? So he says here, under the influence of scientific assumptions, we assume that we are just units of measurement. We're not individuals with unique experiences, unique makeup, unique interests, and unique beliefs. Under the influence of scientific assumptions, not only the psyche, but the individual man, and indeed, all individual events whatsoever suffer a leveling down and a process of blurring that distorts the picture of reality into a conceptual average, right? So we become this median, like the bell curve almost, where you treat groups of people based on the position they fall on the bell curve, right? They're defined by their position, right? We ought not to underestimate the psychological effect of the statistical world picture. And he calls this the statistical world picture. We see the world as statistics and not a fruitful environment of many different meaningful and purposeful lives, right? It displaces the individual in favor of anonymous units that pile up into mass formations. Bell curve, right? Science supplies us with, instead of the concrete individual, the names of organizations, and at the highest point, the abstract idea of the state. Right? No longer are we individuals living a real world with real lives, but we are all units, measurements being controlled by this abstract thing called a state. Most people couldn't even tell you what the state actually is. And that's how they're able to gain so much power, because they are so abstract and elusive. At the highest point, the abstract idea of the state as the principle of political reality. Trump, Biden, Trump, Clinton. I mean, just look at the past 7 or 8 years. Obama. I mean, this just describes exactly what we've been experiencing. This abstract state as the principle of political reality. They create our realities for us. And what's interesting is social media just exacerbates this whole thing. And we're the ones that are annexed in kind of this surrogate brain for the mainstream, right? And we create this whole new world, but it's just parroting of their political reality and principles. This is good. The moral responsibility of the individual is then inevitably replaced by the policy of the state. So no longer do you have moral responsibility for yourself. No longer do you have to sit and analyze how you see the world, how you see things. No longer do you reflect on what you believe and what is right and what is wrong. You know, the classic philosophical questions of how should I live? How does one live? What is right? What is wrong? What does life mean? What's the purpose in life? What's my purpose? These questions, people think the only reason you would even hear these types of questions is because you're reading some old book that no one cares about anymore. These concepts have completely disappeared on this so-called planet, right? The moral responsibility of the individual is then inevitably replaced by the policy of the state. Instead of moral and mental differentiation of the individual, you have public welfare and the raising of the living standard. The goal and meaning of individual life, which is the only real life, the goal and meaning of the individual no longer lie in the individual development, but in the policy of the state. Oh man, that's a hard hitter. No longer are we guiding our lives in this world, right? Earthly, speaking earthly here, our decision making, right? Our belief systems, right? That which guides our behaviors day to day. It's no longer something that comes from us. Our, thought processes and wrestling of concepts and ideas or faith, right? No longer is it coming from these things. It's coming from the state. The state is now handing down our matrix, within we live. No longer lie in the individual development, but in the policy of the state, which is thrust upon the individual from outside and consists in the execution of an abstract idea, which ultimately tends to attract all life to itself. The individual is increasingly deprived of the moral decision as to how he should live his own life, and instead is ruled, fed, clothed, and educated as a social unit, accommodated in the appropriate housing unit, and amused in accordance with the standards that give pleasure and satisfaction to the masses. I mean, this is Ortega y Gasset right here, the mass man. It's like, that's exactly what you see today. It's what has come of society. It's what has come of the natural man. Cooperation, cultural acceptance. How do they get us to accept? By destroying our ability to think for ourselves and find ourselves, to build integrated, healthy identities through an individualistic pursuit, because we are an individualistic culture. We're not collectivists. So we are not going to figure these things out through a collective, like a collective route. That would be more, those that are listening from the East would probably resonate more with this a collective pursuit, in that we kind of define ourselves through our group. I'm not saying individualism is better than collectivism, but an individualistic culture is not going to succeed collectivistically, and vice versa is my point. You are a product in many ways of your environment, at least 50% of it. The rest we could consider based on genetics and some other things. So they destroy our ability to form healthy individualism by giving us a false sense of individualism, which is in a sense harnessed. And it's really a pseudo-individualism that is exploited, but also props up their system, right? It's the Xanatos Gambit is a good example of this. Similar to the Xanatos Gambit would be the Hegelian dialectic. So we have the pseudo-individuals, pseudo-collective, right? You look at the left, look at the right. They all think they're some group and they have shared identities, but really they're a bunch of lost individuals who are grouping together and bonding through weak sources of bonds, right? Very weak sources. It's not rooted in anything real, substantive. It's weak. And if you think about our entire nation, and more so the world at this point, specifically in the West, all these weak bonds, how are we going to not only think for ourselves, but in an earthly sense, fight against some of this infrastructure that's being built up around us? We can't even get our own ish together. How are we going to work as a team? How are we going to work together as a group? It's impossible. You look at the news, you look at all the divisive and divisive tactics. I mean, come on. There's no way. So this is how they get cultural cooperation, through rotting the individual, creating a false individual that by logically will create false and pseudo collectives. That pseudo collective is then controlled through its emotions, sensibility, sensuality. These are the things that they use to control the masses. Emotionalism. And of course, pleasure, which is a part of that, through drugs, media, so forth. Really what they're saying is the future is post-human. That's what it's about, guys. So you can let all of these individuals out there with these cluster bees and all of these different individuals that are just a little lost and are finding new identity channels to give themselves meaning and purpose in the world. You know, this whole little situation we have is really about post-humanity, in my view. In my view, no gender, no race, no nations. Trans-species universe. Within the metaverse. Remember the metaverse? So we have the universe in a metaverse, because really we're nothing. We're just specks of dirt. We don't mean anything, right? That's how it's so easy for us to be considered units and measurements, because we're nothing within this massive metaverse of many other universes with many other planets just like ours, with many other types of life. So we mean nothing. We mean nothing at all. Clever, isn't it? Changing the image of man. This is how they accomplish it. And imagine the youth that buy into this stuff, that watch all the sci-fi and shows and cartoons and are just indoctrinated with these perspectives from just, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old. By the time they become adults, they're going to have a completely different view of what makes up humanity and what humanity is. And yes, they are the Homo sapien.net.
The human beings that are arriving to us now, they're not the same species as you. They're Homo sapien.net. I mean this in all seriousness. They are not the same species as you. They have never lived without access to some kind of a virtual supercomputer attached to their body. We have to figure out what that Homo sapien.net is. How does that person learn? How can that person be influenced? How can you communicate with that person? And so the conflicts of the future are all going to have to then realize that there is a huge transformation in human evolution.
They are a new type of human. New brain wiring, new neural pathways, new codependencies. Children born into the world given smart technology before they can read. We are designing a new type of human. Hence, non-binary, hence post-humanity. This is an incremental process. We are in the transition. We're on the ships. We're making the middle passage. We're on our way to post-humanity.